It's Wednesday, so you already know what that means. Hey, y'all, and welcome back to the Graduated and Grown podcast. My name is Ariane, and I'm your host, and I'm a young adult that's still trying to figure out adulting every single day. Something happens every single day where I really wish I could go back in time and go back to like fifth grade when I literally had no worries, nothing to do. All I had to do was read and go to school. And school was so easy back then. Please take me back to those days. Anyway, so for today's episode, we have an absolutely amazing guest. I want to give a round of applause to Miss Starla Sampaco. So I met Starla virtually. So me and Starla have never met each other in person. We met virtually through like a common internet friend. And I did an interview with her for her platform, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And we've honestly kept in contact ever since. It's been actually really cool to speak with someone that was in the industry that I thought I wanted to go into. And Starla is honestly so amazing, not only just as a human being, but also as an entrepreneur and like advocate for being an advocate for yourself, if that makes sense. So, like I said, Starla is today's guest. Starla is a Seattle-based news anchor, and she realized that she wanted to actually work as a news anchor when she was 8 years old, which I think is so cool. So her dreams literally came true. And Starla also has a side hustle, which I feel like has grown more than just a side hustle. But she is the founder and creator of the Career Survival Guide, which is a platform that's dedicated to helping women and also people of color advocate for themselves at work, which I think is so essential. So a big part of today's conversation, in all honesty, is talking about being an advocate for yourself. I think that's an area that I've really been trying to work on. I can definitely say that there has been growth between September and now, but I think I definitely have a long way to go. And I think the average person who graduates from college kind of struggles with this because I think as a newbie on the block, essentially I know almost nothing. Like, obviously, I do know some things, obviously, but compared to the people that I'm working with that have been working on this team for 8 years or 20 years, 40 years, etc., I am a peon. I know nothing. But advocating for yourself at work is so important. Like, speaking up for yourself when you have an idea, speaking up when something's wrong, salary negotiations, different things like that. We're going to unpack all of that into today's episode, so I should probably stop talking. But again, you guys are really, really going to enjoy this episode. Starla is super cool, super insightful, and she's also a young adult, so she's not only giving advice for us, but I think she's experienced a lot of the things that a lot of us are experiencing right now. So be sure to sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode with Starla Sampaco, where we really talk about being a young adult, navigating workplaces after graduating from college, being an advocate for yourself, having side hustles, and a lot more. So enjoy. I don't know about you, but I think adulting is hard. Figuring out your love life, finances, friendships, professional life, health, and how to make a freaking doctor's appointment on your own can be so overwhelming sometimes. So, welcome to Graduated and Grown, a podcast that's focused on helping you and me overcome the struggles of adulting. Let's have some fun yet honest conversations about life once you're graduated and grown. All right, Starla, thank you so much for being on the Graduated and Grown podcast. The listeners got a little bio about you right before we started recording, but I have a couple of icebreakers that I want to ask you just so that I can get to know you a little bit better and the audience as well. So, this is one of my favorite questions. If you could go on vacation anywhere in the world, COVID-19 wasn't a thing, where would you go and why?
Ooh, I mean, I would have to go back to the Philippines. That's where my parents are from. I grew up in the States, but my parents are from the Philippines. And I just miss my family so much. I think that's what the pandemic has made me miss the most, those times that I got to hang out, not just with my parents, but with our whole extended family. And I'd
Yeah.
probably want to visit Cebu again. It's beautiful. The last time I went, I had such a great experience. The people are so nice, and the food was to die for. So good.
Nice. So how many times have you been to the Philippines?
Okay. So the first time I went, I was 4. And then when I was 6 or 7, we lived there for a year and a half,
Wow.
which was
Mhm.
a really amazing experience for a young kid to have, to live internationally. And then we visited a couple other times. So I think I've gone 5 times total. And I love it.
Wow.
I love it so
When was the
much.
last time you went?
I went in 2019
Oh,
for a whole
wow.
month. Yeah. And so we had this
Nice.
big family reunion. Both of my parents have such big families. I think they each had 8 kids on each
Wow.
side. So I have so many aunts and uncles. They have cousins. I have so many cousins, grandparents, my parents' aunts and uncles. So it's always a big
Mhm.
affair when we go back. And I was also able to shoot some videos and some interviews for Career Survival Guide as well. So it was a really special,
Oh,
fun trip.
nice. And we'll get into the career survival guide later for those of you who do not know. And I know, like, around I think the second time that we spoke, we both talked about Bling Empire. So, what
Mm.
are some shows and or movies that you've watched recently that you really, really liked or that you really didn't like?
Ooh, okay. Let's see. So I've been trying to get into The Crown. I
Okay,
will
I want
say
to start that.
it's a little boring.
Mm,
Because
really?
I'm kind of obsessed with Meghan Markle. I
Okay.
read Finding Freedom. I'm a big Meghan stans, hashtag Sussex Squad. But I tried to watch The Crown and it just moved really slowly. So I haven't finished it yet, but I might try to get back into it because there were some parts that were exciting, but it was no Bling Empire. Like, I need that
Mhm.
level of excitement in a show to keep me engaged.
Right. Drama every episode.
Yes, yes.
Okay, next question. What would you say is your favorite and least favorite part of being a young adult?
Mm. Okay, well, least favorite is like the financial obligations, of course, right? Like, I think
Mhm.
that's the biggest wake up call when, you realize you have to pay for certain bills or like you can't just ask your parents to spot you for the same things anymore. That's always like really frustrating when you're like, oh,
Mhm.
I have this big, like, insurance didn't cover all of this, but now I have to pay for it. What the heck? So that's my least favorite part. But I think my favorite part is also being able to control what I do with my time. Right. I think that's the
Yes.
biggest thing for me. And I always tell people, like, for me, my time is so important because it's the one currency that once you spend it, you can never get it back. And being able to control it as an adult just feels really good.
I feel that 100%. It's actually funny that you mentioned the insurance thing. I went to the doctor a couple weeks ago and then I saw what I was responsible for and I was like, "Oh, okay, I guess insurance isn't going to cover all of this." It was a wake-up call for sure. Don't even want to think about it. Okay, next question. This is the last question for the icebreaker section. What would you say was the most memorable moment in your career so far?
The most memorable moment of my career so far. Gosh. Hmm. Let me take a second to think about that. So there's been a lot of
Yeah,
memorable
go ahead.
moments, both good and bad. But I think I'll focus on a good one. I was really excited when I got to start my current job as a news anchor at KCTS 9 in Seattle, which is Seattle's PBS station, because I had watched this news station as a kid growing up. Like, our PBS
Mm,
station was also where you watched programs like Arthur and things like that, and then they
Clifford.
would transition to the news, right? Exactly. And it was such a big moment for me to be a newscaster in my own hometown. And I felt so much pride because I had wanted to work in news since I was 8 years old, right? And so
Aw.
to be 24 and to get to make that dream come true was really special. And so, I think that first day was probably my most memorable career moment.
Did you take a lot of pictures and post it on social media?
Not on my very first day.
Mhm.
I will admit I looked pretty tired my first day. I mean, So it's funny too because I have my little ID card that gets me in and out of my badge
Mhm.
that gets me in and out of the building. And the HR person had just had me stand in front of a wall and took a picture with the really harsh overhead lights.
Uh-huh.
And I looked at that photo and I was like, this can never see the internet can never see this because this is such a bad photo. And I think I probably stayed up the night before preparing and kind of
Right.
getting the jitters. So I looked really tired in my eyes. But the week after that, I looked much better, much more calm. And there were lots of photos of that. You can see they're like everywhere on my social
Wow.
media.
Okay, I have to go scroll and go check them out. But thank you so much for answering the little icebreaker questions. I think that definitely helped me kind of understand you, I guess, in a different light on a more personal level. And I think the listeners could definitely agree. But let's move into the meat and the potatoes of the episode. So today, as you know, we're talking about, being in our careers as young adults. And a big part of this interview, I really want to talk about advocating for yourself, which I think is something that I struggle with so much. I struggled with it as a kid. I wouldn't like really want to go talk to my teachers if I knew that something was right, but they said it was wrong. And just even in the workplace, I think I'm kind of struggling with that. And I feel like probably most people in our age bracket is probably struggling with that. All young professionals are probably struggling with that. But I know you have a lot of great tips and experiences either from your personal career or the people around you. So let's get started. The first thing
Yeah.
I want to ask you about is, I guess, about your background. So, where did you go to college and what was your degree in?
Yeah, so I grew up in the Seattle area and I decided to stay in state for college. So
Mm-hmm.
I went to the University of Washington in Seattle and I double majored in journalism and law, societies, and justice. That
Mm.
second major is basically a hybrid between poli sci and sociology, but it was super interesting. I'm really glad that I was able to major in both.
Mm-hmm. Really interesting. So, what inspired you to major in both instead of just focusing on one?
Yeah, I got this advice from a news anchor who's here at our ABC affiliate in Seattle. And I think she actually still works there, but she had told me, if you can really try to major in something outside of journalism, because
Mm-hmm.
you can learn a lot of those journalism skills once you're doing an internship, but you want to have some subject matter expertise, right? And so I figured with something like law, societies, and justice, that could only help me as a journalist to understand,
Oh, for
how
sure.
legal systems work and to understand the justice system. But in addition to having really amazing professors in that department, they also had some really cool opportunities. One of them had to do with the criminal justice system. And what they would do is they would have students apply to be part of this program, but we would get to drive up to the men's prison in our state once a week and take class right next to the prisoners, right? And we would be at that
Really?
prison and get to interact with them, right? And so when I tell people about that, they're usually like, oh my God, that sounds so scary. You went to jail with all these people who've committed crimes. But I think it was actually one of the best experiences I had in college because it really taught me how to be more empathetic as a person, right? Like, I
Yeah.
think so many times, and I see this in the media industry as well, we paint people as either good people or bad people. But the reality is actually a little bit more complicated than that. I think once you get to meet people and face them and talk to them, you start to understand that there's a lot more to a person than one decision that they've made in their
Yes.
life,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there are a lot of things, there are a lot of factors at play that lead someone to go down that path. Similarly to how, I ended up in this position because I grew up in a family that was able to support me. I had so many good choices to make.
Mm-hmm.
And then you meet folks who maybe didn't have those same privileges and it just makes you see the world in a different way and also just understand that you know there's there's a lot of good in people in places where you wouldn't expect, right? And that's
Yeah.
not to say that people shouldn't have to be held accountable when they commit crimes or anything like that, but I think it's really important to understand that complexity, and that was a really formative experience for me as a young adult.
Mm-hmm. I don't want to compare you to Kim Kardashian, but it's funny because I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about, Kim's journey to becoming a lawyer. I think she's studying for the LSAT or something right now, or she's doing her
Oh gosh.
apprenticeship. But she talked about that, like, you can't judge someone just based off of one decision that they make. Like, when you actually sit down and speak to people that are either currently in jail or have been in jail, you realize, wow, there's a lot more to them than just what's on their record. So that's really, really awesome. I think that is definitely a great major to pair with journalism. So, was there any point in time where you thought about being, I don't know what the proper title is, but like a politics reporter, a political journalist? Has that ever crossed your mind?
Yeah, it did. And like, hold up. I think it's hilarious that you just compared me to Kim Kardashian because I used to binge their reality show in high
Same.
school.
Same, same.
So I just like, this is such a funny moment for me. But actually, yes, I did consider that. And I was actually working, my first job as a reporter was as a legislative reporter.
Mhm.
So I had moved to Olympia, Washington, which is our state capital, to cover the 2017 legislative session. So I had this daily TV program where I would talk about new bills that were coming in, kind of the arguments for and against those bills, and also giving updates on the new politicians that were in the city at the time. And so it was a really perfect segue from doing that major and having that experience, and then actually covering the news as a reporter.
Oh, wow, that's really, really cool. So, when you graduated from college, is that what you was that like your dream career to follow that path, or did you wanna do something different?
I was really open to anything. I will say that I decided to go into journalism because I wanted to cover the stories of immigrants
Mhm.
specifically. I mentioned in the intro that my parents are both immigrants from the Philippines, and I've always been fascinated by this idea of, once you uproot yourself and move to the United States, how does that affect your cultural identity and how you see the world? And those
Yeah.
are the kinds of stories that always resonated with me. And those are the stories I knew I wanted to tell as a journalist. Of course, when you think about the immigrant experience, that intersects with politics, it intersects with culture and art. And so there are a lot of different ways to go. But I think working in politics or doing legislative reporting was a very obvious choice for me because there was just a lot of overlap there.
Okay, that's awesome. Good to know.
Thank you.
So, how was your experience moving from a full-time college student that had a double major to a full-time adult that now had like bills and a full-time job to report to?
Ooh, yeah. So I will, for full transparency, when I was in my first job, I was still living at a home that my parents owned.
Like
So
me.
I didn't have to pay. Oh, awesome. Okay. We have that in common. Yeah. So I didn't have to pay all of my bills on my own, which I find, that it was such a blessing. And I'm really grateful. I understand that's a privilege and that's not something that everyone has. But it still was very difficult, right? Because I think when you are so used to being in school, and I was a very good student, I'm sure you were based on what I know about you, I was always really good at following directions and following rules.
Yeah.
Well, once you graduate, there is no survival guide or blueprint that tells you how to be an adult. You just kind of have to figure it out on your own.
Yeah.
And that was really shocking for me. Like, I didn't know what to do without that structure, right? And in my first job, I would ask kind of these dumb questions to my bosses sometimes about my next steps and what I was supposed to do that day. They'd be like, "It's all you. You get to decide." And I just thought this is the weirdest feeling ever, but also so exciting. But there was definitely a learning
Mhm.
curve when it came to adulting, and I'm still figuring it out. I still don't always know what I'm doing.
I'm hoping that we'll be able to figure it out, like, by the time we're 30, then, like, a light will like, a light switch will go off, and they'll be like, "I know everything now," but that may or may not happen.
I hate to break it to you, Ariane. I've done career survival guide interviews with folks into their 50s, and even those folks say, I still haven't figured it out. So I think I'm just trying to set my expectations of I'll never feel like I figured it out completely, but
Mhm.
hopefully I'll just feel like I'm getting wiser as I get older, which that's
Mhm.
really all we can ask for.
You're right, I'll take that, that sounds good. Okay, so you mentioned that you are currently an anchor for the PBS affiliate in Seattle. So how did
Yeah.
you get that job, especially at the age of 24, I've never heard of anyone ever having an anchor position in their 20s, at least not their like early 20s, maybe like 29.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know if there are any other anchors in Seattle who started that young. I know that you can be an anchor in your early 20s if you work in a smaller city. And that's actually
Mhm.
what I was told throughout college as well. I was told, if you want to make it in news, you're going to have to graduate from college, move to a smaller town, and slowly work to
Yeah.
bigger cities until you eventually make it to Seattle. And that's what I was told, all throughout college, that you probably won't make it back to Seattle until your 30s, maybe, and it's going to be really difficult and really hard. But I think there's a lot of value in knowing which advice to listen to and which advice to kind of
Mm.
roll off. Because had I believed that, then I would have accepted those first offers out of college to move outside of Seattle to a smaller town. Um, but I just kind of listened to my gut, and I knew I want to stay in Seattle and I don't want to do things the traditional way. So I started
Mhm.
by trying to get an on air job, but it wasn't in television, it was in digital. There was a technology news company that was all online, and I had a connection at the company, and I thought, okay, this would be a cool opportunity. Why don't I pitch them a video role? And so I met
Hmm.
with the managers and I told them about my skills, and they were interested, but they didn't have an opening for me at the time. And so I just kind of kept in touch, and eventually they were ready to hire me on. So my first experiences in
Wow.
Seattle as an on camera personality or an on camera journalist were not in television, it was digital first. And so I was basically their one woman band video team. It was just me, and I was hosting and producing and editing a daily YouTube show on technology news. And I just kind of made sure that I kept in touch with all of my contacts in the Seattle journalism industry, kind of knowing in the back of my head that eventually I'd probably end up in TV news again. And then when I was
Mhm.
24, I was no longer working as that on air digital correspondent. And instead, I was focusing full time on Career Survival Guide when the opening happened. And so the hiring manager at KCTS 9 actually knew someone that I interned with back when I was
Mm.
in college several years ago. And he had asked her, I'm looking for a new news anchor, a new host. Do you know anyone? And I guess I came to mind right away. And then he reached out to me on
Wow.
LinkedIn. We connected. I talked to him on the phone, went in for my on site interview, and then I got the offer. So I don't want to make it seem like it was an easy process, even though it sounds like it was easy. It took a lot of time, right? And I
Mhm.
was pretty intentional about the certain steps that I took. Um, but I just, if there's someone listening to this podcast and they're at a crossroads in their career and they're being told, you need to do this specific thing and follow this specific path, and your gut is telling you otherwise, don't be afraid to listen to your gut,
Mm.
because sometimes you can make it work even if you do the non traditional path. And really, the only person who can decide your limitations is really you. So I think that's a big takeaway that I got out of that experience, because had I listened to all that advice, I'm not sure I'd be a news anchor in Seattle. I probably would have relocated, still trying to make my way to Seattle. But it didn't really
Yeah.
have to be as complicated as everyone said it would be.
Wow, that's awesome. So the intern friend that referred you, did you keep in contact with that intern friend or?
So she was a manager at the time that I was an intern. And we
Mhm.
didn't, I had tried to meet with her for coffee, but she was always super busy. I mean, she wasn't,
Mhm.
she was leading a very big team. And so really the main way we kept in touch was on social media. Like we would see each other
Wow.
at conferences, and I always made sure to show up to the conference. And if I knew she was there, I would say hello, because I had a really amazing experience working with her. But she really kept up with me through social media. And I think it's so important to give yourself opportunities to be visible, right? Because we can't always sit down for coffee or for Zoom meetings with everyone in our networks. But if we're sharing about what
Yeah.
we're doing using tools like LinkedIn or even Instagram and Facebook, you'll still be top of mind for them and they won't forget about you. So that was I was really glad that I knew that as I was pursuing my career, I should share what I was doing online, even if it wasn't every day, but it was still enough where folks still remembered who I was and they were still able to keep tabs on
Yeah.
me.
Wow. That's a really, really interesting story. I love that for you. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
All right, so we've mentioned Career Survival Guide multiple times, but some people may not know what it is yet. So, Starla, what is the Career Survival Guide?
Yeah, Career Survival Guide is a company that I founded in 2019. And I founded the company in response to a really serious problem that I noticed throughout my own career and also in the careers of the folks I covered as a journalist. And that problem is that women and POC face unique barriers to professional success. And a lot of us feel unprepared to navigate those barriers once we join the workforce. So, my company
Mm,
helps women and POC advocate for themselves at work. And we do this through career workshops or speaking engagements, one on one coaching. And also, I do free content on my Instagram and also YouTube channel. Now, as an extension of that, I also get to work with clients who are company decision makers and hiring managers because in 2020, I started doing a research project for Career Survival Guide. And actually, that's how I met Arion. We met through a mutual friend.
yes.
And so, which was super fun. I'm so glad that I met you that way. And basically, I was just doing these research interviews with young women in POC to learn more about their career pain points. Because, as an Asian American woman who was creating content for POC of all backgrounds, I just wanted to make sure that I was becoming aware of my blind spots because my experience as a woman of color definitely doesn't speak for everyone's experience. And so I've done dozens of research interviews. And because of that, it not only helps me create better content, but it also makes me aware of a lot of opportunities where employers can improve and make their workplaces more inclusive. And so, as an extension of the work that I'm doing with early career women in POC, now I get to work with company decision makers and HR managers to help them build more inclusive workplaces. So, that's been a really cool kind of like unexpected addition to the work I do because I like being able to work with folks and employers who actually have the power to make the changes to workplaces to make
Yeah.
them better for women in POC.
Wow, that's awesome. And so I know hiring more women and people of color is starting to actually become a priority for lots of different companies. I know for my company, they have different goals that they want to meet by like 2024 that involve like hiring more women into leadership positions and being in more communities of color, different things like that. So in 2020, I feel like that's when a lot of people and companies had that wake up call. So how did that wake up call impact your business? Did you start getting more emails, more calls? Were you getting more comments on Instagram saying, how can I bring more people of color or women into my business? Like, how did that affect your business?
Yeah, I think at least with the audience that I have online, those were folks who were always really invested in
Mm,
helping women in POC succeed at work, especially because most of my audience are made up of women in POC.
mhm.
But I will say that it did create, I did notice more of a sense of urgency among folks, especially employers who were realizing that, they really had to do something about the diversity problems at their companies. And so, actually, I recently had a speaking engagement. I led a webinar for the Society of HR Management,
Nice.
and it's called Why You're Not Retaining Early Career Women in POC and What You Can Do About It. And we had more than 90 people sign up, which is really amazing because I think everyone's just feeling this sense of urgency of, we have a lot of work to do and we have to start right now.
Hmm. Wow. And so why would you say that I know why, but I want to know your opinion. Why is diversity and inclusion important in the workplace? Like, we've had companies around for 200 plus years and there hasn't been much, diversity and inclusion. So why is it important?
Well, of course, the first thing that always comes to mind is how it impacts our business objectives, right? There's been so many studies that show that diversity is good for business. It not only drives your bottom line, but companies that are more diverse also tend to be more innovative, right? I think another thing, though, if you take a step back, we are becoming a more global and interconnected world. And for a lot of companies, their audiences and their customers are very diverse and they represent all types of demographics and even more than one nationality, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're creating products for a diverse audience base or customer base, you need to have people who represent different demographics and different schools of thought behind the product as well.
I agree with you 100%. And earlier you mentioned that, and on your website, you said that women and people of color face unique barriers to professional success. So, for those that may not know, what are some of the barriers that we face?
Ooh, how much time do we have?
We have all day.
Oh gosh. Well, I'll try to keep it short so that your podcast isn't 3 hours long. I mean, I think there are a lot of things, right? Some of them have to do with the workplace itself, and some of them also have to do with the individual. So, one thing that can be a barrier is that lack of representation, right? I often, in my research interviews, I'll talk to young women in POC who say, I would love to find a mentor, but I just can't find people at my company who look like me.
Mm,
Like they mostly have men or people who aren't people of color in their companies. And I think even though I've had successful mentorship relationships with folks who don't look like me, I think there is something to be said with sharing a background with someone who's advising you, right? Because women experience the workplace differently than men
for
do,
sure.
right? And people of color experience the workplace differently than white people do.
Hmm.
And so I think it's really important, I think, that companies start to think more about having diversity not just in the entry level roles but also in leadership and in senior
Yes.
level roles, because we've all heard about similarity bias, right? Like we tend to like and want to help folks who are similar to us in some way. I was
Yes.
actually doing a research interview with a young Black woman who works in media, and she had told me, I really want to grow my network, and I've been reaching out to all sorts of folks for informational interviews. And I have to say, it's mostly women of color and, in particular, Black women who respond to my emails. And
Mm,
so it is such an
wow.
advantage if you go into an industry where there are folks who are like you because they might be more inclined to help you, right? So it's really important that
Hmm.
there is that representation in the senior levels of your industry. Now, another barrier I think is folks not knowing how to advocate for themselves. And that's why I started Career Survival Guide,
Yes.
because that was a big pain point for me. It's a big pain point for a lot of other women in POC that I know. And I think it's tough because it's something that a lot of people face. It's not just women in POC, it's also folks who grew up low income. I've heard that a lot from folks who are low income, folks who were first generation college students, so the first in their families to go to
Hmm.
college or college in the US specifically, and also for immigrants and the children of immigrants. And I can definitely speak to it being a challenge for a lot of kids of Asian immigrants to advocate for themselves, because so many of us were taught you should just be grateful to have a job. And so
Wow.
once you get that offer and you want to negotiate that offer, you have that little voice in your head saying you should just be grateful to have a job. Don't ask for more.
Hmm.
And we see how that hurts us long term, right? When you think about pay equity, if you never negotiate your pay, you could be leaving, like, I think it's like $1 million on the table over the course of your lifetime,
Hmm.
right? And that doesn't even include 401k contributions. So if we think about pay inequity, being able to advocate for yourself is probably one of the most lucrative skills that you can have,
Yes.
right? And I think when I think of other barriers, there are also those double standards that women and POC have to deal with in the workplace that maybe our white and male colleagues don't have to deal with. So I'll
Mhm.
give you another example from my research. I spoke to this woman. She's of Asian descent, and she was telling me like, I have to be really careful about how I communicate at work. And she had said, I have white male colleagues who will literally, she had a colleague who literally said, I don't want to effing do this. And he said the actual word in
Mhm.
a professional work meeting about a task that he was being asked to do. I don't want to effing do this.
Mhm.
Can you imagine, Ariane, if someone like you or I said that in
It
a
would go
workplace
silent.
setting? Yeah, they would say that we were divas, that we were hard to work with. We would be penalized for it in our careers to act like that. And so
Mhm.
I find that women in POC, of course, not everyone, but a lot of us feel like we have to be super put together and super on point all the time because we don't have a lot of room for error. We're
Yeah.
perceived differently. And that's just the truth, right? And it's not fair. And I'm not saying that, it's bad, but it is, it's not bad that we have to act really professional. I don't think that's bad. I think what's bad is that we don't have other options,
Yeah.
right? I mean, we don't have a lot of room for error, and we see this again and again. And I've seen that in my career again and again. So there are a lot of double standards and bias that can get in the way of our success. And we have to end up, navigating our careers very intentionally and being very careful all the time, which takes up kind of a lot of emotional labor.
Yes, it does. Emotional and physical. I know when I started my job in September, so I started off, I would always have my camera on, always be dressed, fully engaged in the meetings. And then after a couple months went by, I noticed, not everybody had their camera on. So I was like, oh, I can turn my camera off. And so I was talking to my boyfriend about it, and he was like, you should always have your camera on. You should always be professionally dressed because, when you're a woman, you're a person of color, you have to, in order to be on par with everyone else, sometimes you have to do extra. So you should always have your camera on. You should always be engaged. You should always ask different questions. And I don't want to say that it's unfair, but we just have to do that extra work.
I mean, I would say that it's unfair. Yeah, I mean, even I worked as a tech journalist for a while, and the tech industry has that, they have that reputation of you can show up in a hoodie and
Yeah,
jeans. And I
my
speak to
dream.
my, yeah, I know. I mean, I speak to my colleagues and mentors and friends who work in tech who are women of color, and they're like, yeah, no, I won't be taken seriously if I show up in jeans and flip flops. Like, they're not going to see me as someone with credibility or authority.
Mm.
And that is the reality that we have to navigate.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You're right. Well, let's move into this next section. So, I have a couple questions that I think will help people like me and people like you figure out how to survive our careers. So, I want to start off by asking you a question about just some tips and or tricks that you have for young adults who are just entering the workspace. I think I started 6, 7 months ago, and I feel like there's still so much I don't know. So, what general tips do you have for us?
Mm. Well, I'll start with kind of the smaller tips and then we can go into the bigger picture tips.
Mm-hmm.
So, when it comes to the day to day, one thing that you must be doing is tracking your work wins. So,
Mm-hmm.
I always recommend doing it at least on a weekly basis if you can. You can do it in a notebook or you can do a digital spreadsheet like Excel or Google Sheets. But you want to track your weekly wins because not only does it give you a confidence boost in a place where you can track your progress, but also, when performance reviews comes around and you want to ask about that raise, you have all the receipts showing all the good things that you did over the course
Mm-hmm.
of the year and how you created a positive impact for your workplace. So I think tracking your work wins from the very start is really important.
I just want to butt in right here. I love, if you guys don't follow Starla on Instagram, make sure you follow her. What's your Instagram name again?
At Starla Sampaco.
Yes, follow her. One day you posted on your story and you said, what are some work ones? And I was like, what are my work wins for the week? I realized I never really sat down to think about, what did I accomplish each week. So I think that is a great piece of advice, especially when it comes to the time for the salary conversations, maybe bonus conversations. Love that. Okay, you can continue now.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you for the shout out. I'm glad you found that helpful. Yes, I do work wins Wednesdays. I don't do it every Wednesday. I'm trying to do it maybe every other Wednesday. But if you follow me on Wednesdays, you can tell me about your work wins and I'll share it with all of my followers so that we can celebrate each other's progress.
Yes.
Because I think it's so important to not only celebrate the big wins, like getting a new job or getting a promotion, but also the little things. Like some people will share, I didn't cry because of work this week. And you're just like, I love that for you.
Me
Like
too.
sometimes that is the win. One time, my friend Lydia was like, I didn't yell at anyone today. And honestly, that's round of applause because sometimes that's the win, right? But on that same vein, I think another big tip that I can give you is if you're getting positive feedback that's given verbally, write it down.
Hmm.
You must document it because if it's just something that someone said but nobody remembers it by the time performance evaluations come around, it's almost like it didn't happen,
Yeah.
right? So if you get good verbal feedback, take a note in your notebook, write down who said it, what was said, when they said it, just so that you can track that information. Because especially your manager, they probably won't remember everything they said 3 to 12 months back.
Right.
It's impossible to remember everything. So definitely do that for any kind of feedback, but especially positive feedback. Um, if I think about talking to folks who are just starting in their careers, I think a big picture tip is to think about what you really want out of your career and your life. Think about the core values that you hold. And I think it's tough because as you're becoming an adult, you're still trying to figure that out, right? So if you don't know yet, don't feel too bad,
Hmm.
but it does help, I think, if you're in that space where you're feeling like, I don't know if this is where I want to be in my career. I don't know if I'm in the right industry. Well, take a step back and think about what do you really value? Like when you're thinking of 40-year-old Ariane, 40-year-old Starla, what do you want her life to look like?
Right.
Do you want to retire early? Do you want to have your own business? Do you want to be working for someone else? Do you want to be working for yourself?
Hmm.
When do you want to retire? And think about what you want your life to look like, and then reverse engineer it from there. Because I think a lot of us, and myself included, we pick an industry and then we just follow the path that people before us set. But
Mm.
times change, the industries are changing, technology changes. You might be in a job 10 years from now that doesn't exist right now. So it really is in your best interest to be proactive and think about what do I want my life to look like in 30 years, 20 years, 10 years, 5 years, and then reverse engineer from there because it's your life. As Anna Shea says on Bling Empire, it's you get one life. There's no dress rehearsal after this. It's gone.
That's
So be
true.
intentional,
Hmm.
like do as Anna says. Be intentional and think about what you really want because this is your life and you only get one shot.
I love that so much. I think that's a realization I had in the late fall. I was like, Ariane, no one else is responsible for your career except for you. Your mentors are
Mhm.
great, your family is great, your coworkers, managers are great, but they're not responsible for you advancing your career and achieving what you want to achieve in life. So, really,
Mhm.
really great tips. Wow, you're just bringing the fire today. Okay.
Thank you. I had a cappuccino. I'm like, I'm on
Love that.
it.
So, another thing that you mentioned in the podcast was about salary negotiation. Now,
Mhm.
I probably in high school, I would say probably sophomore year of college and below, I had no idea that people negotiated their salaries. I was like, why would you negotiate your salary? They give you a number. Then my senior year, when job offers started to come out, people said, yeah, if you can negotiate your salaries. And, some companies say, oh, non negotiable, blah, 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 blah. So from the different research interviews that you've done and just your experience, do you think that salary negotiations are rare, or are they actually really, really common and just not talked about?
They're actually really common.
Wow.
And I think, yeah, and I think it helps if we are more transparent about our salaries. Now, I'm not saying that you need to post your exact salary on
Mhm.
LinkedIn. Don't do that. But at least with your trusted friends, your trusted circle, talk about money. Because, if you're hiding your salary, if there's pay secrecy, really what ends up happening is if you don't have that knowledge, you end up getting underpaid because
Mhm.
you don't know what market rate is. And you want to help other women in POC who might be underpaid by sharing your salaries. I was literally just texting a mentor today because I'm speaking with a speaking bureau. They're like, send us your rates. And I sent my mentor, okay, this is what I think I'm going to ask for. And she said, actually, market rate is this much. And it was
Wow.
2 to 3 times more than what I was going to ask.
No way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
And it's like I'm on TV, like I should have confidence when it comes to charging to speak because I'm good at it. I'm
Mhm.
already getting paid for it. But even I didn't realize I would have lowballed myself had I not done that extra step of reaching out to someone who knows the market a little bit better than I do, right?
Yeah.
So when it comes to salary negotiation, there are so many great websites like there's Glassdoor, that's a great one. PayScale, they're actually based in Seattle, so they're awesome.
Okay.
There are these sites where you can get kind of a ballpark idea of what certain roles will pay you. But I will say, though, the very best way to figure out what you should be asking for is to talk to people who actually have the jobs
Mhm.
that you're applying for or who have had them in the past. And just asking, instead of going in and asking, hey, how much do you make? Which probably is a little off putting. I like to be a little bit sneaky about it. And I say, okay, so I'm going to apply for this job or I'm about to interview for this job. And I think they're going to ask me about my salary expectations. What do you think is an appropriate range to ask for?
Ooh, that's
And
good.
then they'll usually tell you, what a good range is. Some folks, and most folks actually, in my experience, will say, this is what I'm being paid right now. So
Mhm.
you should ask for this much or this much at least. And you can always follow that question up with, I really don't expect you to tell me exactly what you make, but I'm just wondering what's an appropriate range to ask for,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And so when you do that, they'll give you the most tailored information to the exact role, the exact company, the city that they're living in. That's really the most accurate way to get an idea for what folks are being paid. And I would also advise you, if you can, to ask more than one person because what if one person is being underpaid and there's someone
Yeah.
else on their team getting paid a lot more? You don't want to be in that position where you ask for a number and you realize you could have asked for so much more. So definitely do your research, and don't be afraid to ask because the worst that they can say is no.
That's so
They'll
true.
probably meet you in the middle, but the worst they can say is no. I actually was talking to someone recently who told me about how she didn't negotiate her pay. And then she found out from someone on her team who was doing the exact same work that they were getting paid a lot more because they negotiated. And then you can't help but be resentful a little bit of your work when that happens because you're like, okay, well, I could have gotten $15,000 more, but I'm doing
Mhm.
the same work. And so, do it for yourself, right? Like you want to be able to come to work and feel proud of what you're doing,
Yeah.
not resentful. You want to be motivated. So, even though it's uncomfortable, I promise you it gets easier over time.
No, I literally love that. Since we're still on the topic of salary negotiations, I don't know if you saw this LinkedIn post, but like 3 years ago, somebody started a Google spreadsheet for people in the media
Mhm.
industry to basically share their salaries. Have you seen that?
I've heard of that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I haven't actually clicked on it.
Oh, well, I was looking through it and it was very, very interesting to see. So you would put where you worked. So let's say I worked for, I don't know, NBC Universal, right? I would put that.
Mhm.
I would say what my position was, my salary, my bonus, my ethnicity. Some people put what else did people put? Their sexual orientation, just a lot of different details. And you could really compare your salary in Boston to somebody that lives in Texas that has the same exact role. So I thought that was really, really helpful, especially as someone, that wants to work in the media industry, seeing like, okay, that's kind of an idea. If I want to be a producer or a production assistant, I should be asking
Mhm.
for, I'm going to make a number up, $40,000 a year, and I should not go underneath that. So you mentioned a
Mm.
lot of salary negotiation do's. Do you have any salary negotiation don'ts?
Don't go in without doing your research. Don't just rely on the information you see on Glassdoor. Glassdoor and PayScale are such great tools,
Hmm.
but sometimes you need information that's a little bit more specific.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. In my first role, I was working as a technology journalist here in Seattle, and then a competitor actually tried to poach me. And so I was just curious. I mean, I had no real intentions to leave, but I just thought, okay, well, like, let's see what happens. And I talked to them,
Right?
and they were like, we really like you. If you wanted to come here, I had asked something like, okay, can you give me an idea of the salary situation, something along those lines. And they didn't want to give their number first, which is fine.
Hmm.
But then they were like, well, what would you want? And I told them, and I was so nervous to ask for it, right? And I gave them the number, and then they go, "Oh yeah, we could absolutely do that, and we'd give you relocation." You don't want that response. If you get that response, that means that you asked for way too little. If they're like, "We can
Oh,
absolutely give you that much money," so I should have gone
you want them to
higher.
be like,
And I
"Mm."
Yeah, you want either like a little bit of hesitation or just like a okay, we can do that rather than a oh, we could absolutely do that. And that was my bad because I didn't take the time to talk to other people on that team. I was not prepared for the salary conversation. So I think
Mhm.
maybe next time if I'm in that situation, I would say something like, I'm not ready to give a salary expectation yet. I want to learn more about the role or something, or at least just do my research
Mhm.
first. But yeah, that was a rookie mistake going in with too low of a number because then you can't go back later and be like, oh, actually, I want $50,000 more than that because they'll say, well, you already said
Right?
this number. So.
So when is the best time to do a salary negotiation when you're offered a job? Is it when you get the Well, I guess you're saying you should do your research, so you shouldn't mention it as soon as you get the call then, right? Or the email.
Mm, I mean, I think I usually do my research before I even go in for the interviews. Like,
Okay.
ideally, um and even like before you apply, like if you have like that long-term goal of I want to be in this role, you should start doing your research way in advance. But I
Mhm.
think it is okay because I think one time I got an offer I didn't end up accepting because their salary offer was just too low. We had that discussion right after they gave me the offer. They said, this is the offer, this is the salary, how does that sound to you? And I had told them I'd
Mhm.
actually want it in this range, um, to be. I forgot exactly what I said, but I told them I actually wanted in this range because that's what's the industry standard in Seattle, and that's what I had said to the company. They had said they couldn't go that much further up, and there was some wiggle room, but they weren't able to meet me where I'm at. But to answer your question,
Mm.
I
Mhm.
deviated. You can do it in the call once they tell you about salary, and if they ask, is that okay? Because that's usually an invitation for you to say what you really want.
Part of advocating for yourself is salary negotiation. So, other than that, like what does it mean to advocate for yourself in the workplace, and how do I go about advocating for myself?
Yeah, advocating for yourself can mean so many things. It can mean asking for what you need, it can mean going after your big goals, it can mean setting boundaries, and it can also
Mm.
mean standing up for yourself when someone crosses those boundaries, right? So there's a lot of different ways to advocate for yourself. I think it's really obvious to think of, salary negotiation, asking for money. That's very obvious. But I think also that boundary setting is something that a lot of us struggle with. For
Yeah.
example, If you have a lot of projects on your plate and you're working up against a bunch of tight deadlines, and then someone approaches you with a last minute ask, like, can you do this really big time consuming task, or can you do this additional project? It's really hard for us, especially when we're just starting out, to say no. And it's hard for folks, even who are mid to late career, to say no.
Mhm.
But I think sometimes you do have to advocate for yourself, for your bandwidth and your time, and either say no, or you can negotiate your deadlines too. Right.
Yeah.
So if someone says, can you do this? If it's like 5 o'clock on a Friday and they're like, can you get this to me end of day? I've worked with managers who have been like that. You can say something like, I'm not able to do this. Can I get it to you end of day Monday instead?
Mhm.
So you can try to negotiate the deadline, or you can just go to your manager directly and say, I would love to work on this project, but I have all these other things going on. How should I reprioritize my workload so I can get this project done at
Yeah.
the time that's requested? And sometimes it's like that one conversation, it's that one question where you're communicating your needs. That's a really important way to advocate for yourself in the day to day. Because if you are that person who's just always saying yes, like, yes, I can do it last minute. Yes, I can stay up until midnight 5 nights in a row working on this. You will burn out eventually.
So
And
true.
it will just hurt you. And it'll also hurt the company too if you're not performing at your best. So, learning how to advocate for yourself is also about setting boundaries. And that's kind of my big focus for the year, how to set
Mhm.
boundaries, because even I struggle with that.
I love that so much. And I think that's something that a lot of young professionals do struggle with because I feel like you're kind of told, oh, yeah, when you enter the workplace, like make sure you say yes. That's how you'll get promoted. That's how you'll get brought on to more projects. But, your yeses should have limits. They should have,
Hmm.
9 to 5 expiration times. You don't want to work Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to midnight if you don't have to. So, love that was really, really good advice, Starla. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really tough. And I've had these conversations on, because I love talking with people on the Instagram stories. Like, it's hard to know when you should say no
Yeah.
when it's your first full-time job, right? Or it's like, even if it's not your first job, if you're new to the company and you're still figuring out the lay of the land and you don't know what everyone's responsibilities are,
Yeah.
we kind of feel this inclination to just say yes. Like, we have to be doing this. This is just part of the job. Again, I should just be grateful to have this job, so I need to make time for every request. But sometimes you really just do have to say no. And if we have time, I'll give you one more example. I was in a previous role. I remember one time I was new at the time, and this coworker was not my manager, but they had been there longer. So I just trusted everything they said, right?
Mhm.
And they come to me and they say, oh, like, we need to add this task to your daily workload as part of the project you're working on. And I didn't know better. So I said, yeah, sure. Show me how to do it. So this person is showing me how to do it. Right. And then our boss overheard, and he walks over, he interrupts the conversation and tells this person to stop teaching me how to do that task because it wasn't actually my responsibility.
Wow.
It was the other person's responsibility, and they were trying to offload that task onto me because they just didn't want to do it. And Ariane, I almost fell for it. Like,
Wow.
I didn't know any better. Like, I was
Yeah.
so young and I had no idea that, what the actual, boundaries were.
Yeah.
So I mean, had that manager not intervened, I would have been doing that other person's job for my entire tenure at
Wow.
that company. And you don't want that happening to you. And sometimes, there is no way to know other than communicating with your manager. So if you are new and you're a young employee, like, you need to be like this with your manager. You need to fill them in on what's going on, because there might be problems happening that you don't even realize are problems. And
Mm.
if you have a good manager, they'll tell you how to advocate for yourself, or they'll be the one to advocate for you.
Yeah, that's so true. I definitely think my manager, he's really good he's really good with advocating for me and he's trying to teach me, to
Mhm.
advocate for myself a little bit more. But okay, this is my last question before we go into like the closing section of the podcast. It seems like you are very well connected. You talk to people all the time. Seems like you have some mentors. So, for someone that might be a little shy, like myself sometimes, how do you suggest we network with other people?
And I'm introverted too, which a lot of people don't realize.
Really?
Yeah, like it's draining for me to go to a networking event, and I
Mm.
hate the thought of going to like an in-person networking event where I don't know anyone.
Yeah, that's me. I need at least one person to come with me.
Yes, exactly. So that's a great tip. If you're doing an in-person event like post-pandemic, bring someone with you to make you more at ease. Or I think it actually helps to do the one-on-one stuff instead of showing up to an event where you have to make the rounds and talk to everyone, because that can be really overwhelming and
Yes.
scary. Not my favorite either. And I think it helps to, make a digital connection first. So let's say you're attending a virtual event. There's a panelist who's really resonating with you, like their story is resonating with you. You have the same career values. You want to be like them in some way.
Mhm.
Find them on LinkedIn and send them a message and ask, like, I came to this event. This really resonated with me, and I'd love to learn more about what you do, and be very specific about what you're hoping to get out of the interaction, right?
Okay.
And then once you hop on that one on one Zoom call, because you emailed them already, they already know about you. So you don't have as much of that awkward, like, hi, I'm a student at blah, blah, blah. Because I think that kind of like breaking the ice is kind of the most awkward part of a new
Mhm.
interaction. So if they have already learned about you, this person can already go in and say, oh, I heard you go to the University of blah, blah, blah. Like I went there too. And you already have something in common. And so I think it helps if you start the relationship in the online space, have your LinkedIn attached in some way so that they can learn about you, and then do things one on one and be really prepared with questions that are tailored to this person, right? And I think that always helped me, because if I felt awkward and I didn't want to talk, I would just go in with questions so that
Mhm.
they're filling
They're
the space
talking.
first. Eventually they will turn it to you. The spotlight will be on you eventually, and you'll have to talk, but at least by then you've already established that rapport. So I think that helps. Does that help you, like when you do that as someone who's also shy?
Oh yeah, for sure. I love
Yeah.
asking questions because I feel like also, well, like what could I possibly tell you? But I do love it when I'm talking with someone. They're like, okay, enough about me. Like I have questions for you too, so you can kind of tell. Oh, they're equally invested into this potential relationship, potential
Hmm.
mentorship role, and everything. So that was really really good advice. I will definitely use
Thank
that
you.
more, especially when we go back to in person events.
I know. When do you think we'll do that though? Maybe not until next year.
I think late next year, especially for a
Really late?
big type of event with like over 100 people. I think late next year.
Yeah, I could see that happening, unfortunately. But I've been really careful with COVID, and I think you have too. I think I've seen on your Instagram.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm not risking that. I like food too much to lose my sense of taste or smell,
that is the
and I would not wish that upon my worst enemy. So like it's a no.
that is like the craziest thing to me. Someone I know, they got COVID like around like the summer, so like around July, and
Oh,
they like I haven't spoken to them in a couple months, but in December they still didn't have their sense of taste, and I'm like, I don't know what I would do if I can't taste my favorite food. Like that is unbelievable to
that's
me.
so sad.
Yes.
That's so sad. How old were they older or were they our
No,
age?
they weren't our age. They're around like 50.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah.
Yikes. Yeah. I know, gotta wear those masks. I've been double masking recently.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
started doing that as well because I'm like, COVID, you cannot get me. Please, no.
I have too much going on this year. Like, I can't, this will set back all my work.
Exactly. Well, Starla, thank you so much for being on the Graduate and Grown podcast. But before you go, I know you have so much knowledge and so much wisdom at such a young age. I want to ask you, what advice do you have for other 20 somethings like us that are still trying to navigate their career or just life in general?
I'm going to have to give you advice about advice. We're getting
Okay.
very meta here. So, here's the context. I'm still in my 20s and I'm still a young adult, but I know that in my early 20s, like when I was in college, going into graduating college into my first job, I would turn to people who were smarter than me all the time and ask them for their advice. And
Yeah.
I think because I wasn't confident in my own decision making ability, I kept trying to refer to other people. Like I needed other people to give me permission to do the things that I truly wanted to do. Right. And the thing about surveying people in your life is even if it is well meaning, you will get a lot of conflicting advice. You'll get
Mhm.
a very wide range of advice from people in your life. Sometimes you'll get unsolicited advice, like career advice that you did not ask for. And it's tough, right? Like you'll end up in, I think they call it analysis paralysis, where
Yeah.
you're being pulled in so many different directions. You don't know what to do. And I think it took me a long time to this out, but once I did, it changed my life. And it's that you don't need to take everyone's advice.
Mm.
Again, going to that idea of it's your life. You have to live with the consequences of taking that advice. And to be honest, it's easy for people to give advice when they don't have to live with the consequences of it,
So
right?
true.
So, and I've talked about this on Instagram. When someone gives me unsolicited advice, for example, it's hard to understand, is this constructive criticism that I should listen to, or is this something that I just, should just let it roll off and not
Mhm.
think too much about it. So I usually have a two-part test. The first question that I ask is, does that person have the experience or background or credentials to really know what they're talking about? Like have they succeeded in an area I would like to succeed in? For example, now as a founder of Career Survival Guide, I get business advice from folks who have never started businesses. Right. Like people will just volunteer that information about how I should run my business. And it's always really interesting when I get that. And so you have to ask yourself, do they have the experience to really understand what I'm doing and what they're talking about? And the second question,
Yeah.
which I think is maybe even more important, do we share the same values? Right? Because even if they are super successful, if you don't share the same values, if you take the same path that they took, you're not going to be happy. Even if you have
Mhm.
all the achievements and the accolades, if you design your life exactly like somebody else's, but you don't share the same values, you will lose out in the end. I think one big example
Wow.
from when I was in college was I had several mentors. They were all great. But there was one mentor who was really kind of disappointed in my decision to turn down the first TV news offer I got out of college. And they were disappointed and because I was kind of veering off the path that they took, right? And so they meant very
Mhm.
well. They were really concerned about me. They wanted me to be successful and they were rooting for me. But I also noticed that this person wasn't super happy in their career. On paper, it
Wow.
looked like they really had it going on. Like they had the big title, they had the achievements. But I also noticed that the way that they approached their career was making a big toll on them personally. Like they were kind of resentful of the work they had to do. They weren't super happy all the time. Um, it seemed to me like they didn't feel like they had a sense of agency over their career. So at that moment, as like this really impressionable young college student, I had to decide like if I keep following, the blueprint that this person is giving me, I'm going to end up exactly like them. And I
Mm.
don't want
Wow.
to end up exactly like this person. They have so much valuable information to give me, but that doesn't mean that I have to take every single piece of advice that they give me. So,
Right.
it's again, it's your life. Listen to Anna Shea from Bling Empire. It is your life. And you can't be living your life based on somebody else's opinions because at the end of the day, it's you who has to live with the consequences. So you need to make the best choices for you and you have to get comfortable with disappointing people because at the end of the day, you want to be happy with yourself. You do not want to be disappointed with yourself. Disappoint everyone else except for you.
That is so true. I love that. Love the Bling Empire references. But this was a really fun and also really informational episode. I think the listeners are definitely going to take away, I say, at least 2 to 3 things at the minimum for this episode. And so please plug your Instagram, your YouTube, your website. Like, if people want to connect with you and learn more about the Career Survival Guide, how should they go about doing that?
Yeah, I think the best way to find me and the quickest way to get a response from me is on Instagram. So it's Starla, Starla Sampaco, Sam as in Mary, P as in Paul, ACO, Starla Sampaco. You can find me on YouTube at youtube.com/Starla Sampaco, website starlasampaco.com. And you can also learn about ways to connect with me there, because I do one-on-one coaching, but I can also come and talk to your company as well. So if you ever want to connect with me personally, head to my website and you can look at all of those opportunities over there.
Yes, awesome. Well, thank you again, Starla, for being on the podcast. You guys make sure you follow her on her social media and, maybe invite her to your company so that all of you can learn. And we will talk to you guys next time. I know you love the episode just like me. I know you can tell me later. You can tell me on Instagram. But I really enjoyed recording that episode with Starla. Like, every time we talk, we always have a good time, and I always learn a lot from her, even though we're so close in age. And I hope that you guys were also able to learn something. I'm sure you were. Like, I'm pretty sure that you were able to learn something from that episode. And I really encourage you guys, if you are interested in learning more from Starla, please follow her on her Instagram at Starla Sampaco. She posts literally something, if not every day, every other day. I think it's more like every day. And it's really helpful information. She does like fun playlists, different things like that I think all young people, no matter what like industry you're working in or will be working in, I think you would definitely enjoy her content. So again, be sure to follow her and support the Career Survival Guide. But that's all that I have for you guys in this week's episode. Be sure to follow the Instagram at Graduated and Grown and check out our YouTube, Graduated and Grown. And I will see you guys next Wednesday. Have a great rest of your week and have a great beginning of next week. And I'll talk to y'all soon. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Graduated and Grown podcast. I appreciate you so, so much. If you haven't already, be sure to rate this podcast 5 stars and subscribe to the podcast so you can get a notification every single time a new episode is posted each week. Also, don't forget to follow our Instagram at Graduated and Grown so you can learn a little bit more about our guests, about our topics, get some resources, and provide some feedback and or episode ideas for the podcast. All right, y'all, it was your host, Ariane, and I'll talk with you all next week.